This week, Michael Santarcangelo and myself are going to do the show together, talk about Duo, LockPath, Ixia, SecureWorks, Skyhigh, Cloud Passage, Acalvio, and more. Then we're going to talk about building a bug bounty program. So get Michael and I's take on that coming up next on Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Practice field, I had to do that to the door, and then once the wind caught it, I flew outside the door.
I call that a programmer's workout.
Yes, that is a programmer's workout.
I was at RSA. I got out. I have seen things. I've seen horrible things.
Pony Express. Check out their line of penetration testing devices, including the Pwn Pad, Pwn Phone, and Pwn Pro. For enterprises, there's Pwn Pulse, providing continuous visibility into wired, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth spectrums across all physical locations, including remote sites and branch offices. For all those hard-to-reach places, there's Pony Express. Visit them on the web at ponyexpress.com. In order to deliver the maximum degree of privacy, personal data must be protected without action from an individual. In fact, this requirement is defined in the General Data Protection Regulation, also known as GDPR. What if you could reliably and efficiently build privacy into your information security programs by default? StealthBits Technologies provides solutions that allow data to be collected and used in a manner that achieves GDPR compliance. Privacy by design and by default is not just a GDPR requirement, it's the foundation of StealthBits Technologies. Visit stealthbits.com to learn more today. Gain control of cyber risk with Tenable.io, the first vulnerability management platform built for today's elastic assets like cloud, containers, and web apps. Discover a fresh, asset-based approach that prioritizes vulnerabilities while seamlessly integrating into your environment. And improve ROI with the first elastic licensing approach based on assets, not IP addresses. Tenable.io delivers the data and context you need to secure your elastic attack surface. Start your free Tenable.io trial today by visiting Tenable.io. Welcome, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. This is episode 42, the answer to life, the universe, and everything, so to speak. My special host for today here with me is Michael Santarcangelo, broadcasting from the beach. Michael, welcome to the show.
I feel like I haven't seen you in forever, Paul. How
I know.
Are you?
It's one of those things. We did, 4 conferences in just about a month span. And John has also been very busy as well, and so the recording schedule had to get slightly adjusted. But we're back on track now for some time, which is good. I'm excited about today. We're going to talk about bug bounty programs. We're going to do an announcement for Wild West Hackin' Fest, wildwesthackinfest.com, HACKIN.com. There'll be all sorts of characters from the security community there presenting. Dave Kennedy, Chris Gates, Chris Nickerson, myself, John Strand. He talked about us co-presenting. Usually with John and I, that means I think it's his turn to develop the slides, and then we just get up on stage, and I don't know what they are, and we just present. We like to play like PowerPoint roulette with each other when we present, and it usually turns out pretty good. It actually comes out worse if we both know what's in the slides. So that's how we like to roll. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It'll be out in South Dakota in October 27th and the 28th. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure you go register for that today. And Mike, we've got some enterprise news to talk about, which I'm very excited about. All of our stories this week, because it means we get to poke some fun at some vendors' messaging. We get to talk about some good product announcements, some not so good product announcements. This is the show we're not afraid to name names. So we'll get right into it with Duo Security, that has a program now for managed service providers, which I don't have all the details, but they're somewhat not important, right? Like, this is a very standard play for a lot of companies. However, it's a really easy thing to screw up because it's such a different audience and a customer of yours when you go to an MSSP. I also think it can be a very, very good business proposition for both parties involved. I think on the surface, Duo solution for me makes it a really good fit for MSSPs because the customers of that are using the two-factor authentication scheme from Duo could probably take advantage of that help getting it implemented. And I think Duo makes a good product. I think they're a great multi-factor authentication, lots of options. They've got some great success stories. I hear good things. Michael, what's your take?
Yeah, I like it. I've looked at authentication for years, and I've always liked anytime we can do something around multi-factor authentication. And I was asking you before, kind of your take on Duo. I have no hands-on experience with Duo, but I hear nothing but good things about it. And I think if you're an MSSP today, it's got to be awkward at some level to be like, so I want access to all your data. Cool. So we'd like you to use this two-factor. Oh, yeah, no, I don't have a way to do that. Thanks for asking, though. Mm-hmm. And I kind of harken back now. Again, I don't have the details either. But if I go back to like 1997, 1998, everybody wanted to do PKI, but the version 3 certificates didn't actually require you to be consistent, which meant nobody was interoperable with anybody else. Mm-hmm. So if you're an MSSP and you've got a couple hundred clients, you're not going to try to manage a couple hundred different solutions. And Duo essentially seems like saying, yeah, cool, we got you covered. I like it. I think for some MSSPs, this is going to make them highly competitive. Yes. That's useful.
I agree.
I liked it.
LockPath and SailPoint partner to increase security risk and visibility. And are you familiar with LockPath? LockPath even? You know what?
I met and talked to Chris years ago. Like maybe before I was even Myrtle Beach, if not somewhere around that. In his background, if I'm remembering correctly, and I'm just lazy for not looking it up, I mean, he came out of the GRC stuff, right? So if we think about some of the mm-hmm. predecessors to LockPath, they've done that. So I'm familiar, and I'm definitely familiar with GRC as a concept. In SailPoint, I follow identity a lot. Mm-hmm. In fact, talked to Kevin Cunningham a couple weeks ago and have a story coming up with him soon. So, that I get on the identity side. Let me ask you this question. What am I missing? What's the connection between GRC and identity management?
So the way I'll describe it, and if listeners feel free to challenge me on this one, I think with GRC, it's understanding where your assets are, right? Like where your data is, where it lives, where it flows, and making that, doing compliance on that. I think, and it probably has things that says, who should access that. But identity management is an important component because it's the actual, like, where the boots meet the ground, this user can access this data. And I think that's why they're forming a partnership. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in fact, you know what they call this bearing the lead or bearing the good parts, and I used to make this mistake. Maybe I still do as a writer sometimes. So I found it's buried in the 4th paragraph, and it's the second sentence in the 4th paragraph. This strengthens compliance programs by linking relevant compliance requirements and supporting controls. Right? Okay, so script all that. Here's what it does. You identify governance events such as access certifications, segregation of duty policies, and access change approvals. Oh yeah, got it. Totally got it now. Okay. Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense.
It's a smart partnership, I think, is what we discovered. Yeah. So that's good.
I like
it. I like it when we can cover smart integrations and partnerships. It's a good thing.
Yeah, me too. I dig that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
So there's a lot of machine learning going on.
Machines learning about machines.
Machines learning about machines. And they've coined this, Vectra has coined the term deep learning. And of course, right? It's just really, Vectra Data Science really stepped up its machine learning game by employing deep learning algorithms to detect attacker behaviors in enterprise networks. Like, dude, that's like everyone's trying to say that, and everyone's trying to do that.
You know what's happening here, though, because enter deep learning, which has its roots in mathematics that was originally explored in the 1940s.
Yeah.
Okay, so Hydra is behind this, is what they're saying.
Yeah, well, I mean, machine learning is not new.
Where's Captain America? Yeah,
You got to be careful with vendors that are touting this machine learning thing because, again, it's not new. I think it's an emerging trend in our field, and I think it's going to become table stakes for many vendors, and it's already becoming harder and harder to differentiate, and I think now they're using it as a crutch to differentiate because largely the market doesn't understand the problem, the solution that they're presenting in machine learning and then calling it AI as well. And you're not really sure what questions to ask. And
well, it's interesting. So on our last episode of Startup Weekly, we talked about when you do an ad or something, when you've got your first 50 words, you need to ask a question. You need to pull somebody into it. So since we're not afraid to say things the way they are, for the purpose of illustration, I'm reading this first line, and I've now read it 3 times because I'm trying to see. Let me be blunt. I don't like it, but let me see if I can figure out why. Whether the task is driving a nail, fastening a screw, or detecting a hidden HTTP tunnel, it pays to have the right tool for the job. Here's why this doesn't work. You can now riff off of that, right? If everything's if all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. Fastening a screw, we know people routinely choose the wrong tool for that, and detecting a hidden HTTP tunnel, it logically doesn't flow. Like if you started with driving a nail, or now you got to give me something that's between detecting a hidden HTTP tunnel and and driving a nail. So it's not fastening a screw, driving a nail. So I think hammer. Now you've got to go to a next layer of complexity where I might say, oh yeah, if I don't have the right thing there, that's not going to work. To detecting a hidden HTTP tunnel. But I just kind of read that, and it was a complete non sequitur. And then it says the wrong tool can increase the time to accomplish a task, waste valuable resources, or worse. Right? And what does worse mean exactly? So this whole thing was just kind of, it's interesting.
What's your take on Ixia? They had a product announcement this week as well. Have you spent any time with Ixia, Michael?
I haven't. I already mocked the name a little bit, so I apologize for that.
Remember, so I got the opportunity to speak with Ixia very briefly, so I don't have all the pieces. However, one thing I did remember is that, remember when HD Moore worked for Breaking Point Systems?
Wow, a long time ago.
That was an Ixia acquisition. So so now that helps shed some light on what they do, right?
Yeah, and they're not new.
No,
either.
So their background in network testing and visibility is the part that I get, right? Like they're inside your network. They're able to test certain portions of your network. These are, I think, tools in network engineering teams that are very familiar to them. They often seek out these solutions that can do stress testing. Some of them can do modeling, which is awesome, right? Which helps in building networks. Now, I think with the crossroads that Ixia had is they're like, hey, we can do all this testing, which is kind of like security, right? We can do all this visibility stuff. Like, let's take that and do some security stuff with it and branch out and go off and feed other security products our data. And that's Ixia's security plays. They're basically like, we're taking all our visibility stuff and making it available to security products is the way that I understand it. And I might not have the full picture of that. And John Strand is with us. Hey, John.
Hey, just dropping in. Yeah, that's the way I read this too. And I honestly thought this is a perfect example of a company doing integration correctly. Mike is here.
Yeah.
So what is the problem you're trying to solve? They have a very clear problem that they are bringing a solution to, and it looks like it's a really good approach.
And you know what's interesting? On air, I'll just throw this out there, John. It make a very interesting partner for offensive countermeasures, which we were talking about in the previous show. So I did speak with them they were at B-Sides Boston, and I was able to catch up with them, and I want to follow up with them and learn more. So.
Yeah, that should be a good conversation. Did we already do the Vectra story?
Yes. Did you have something to add on Vectra?
We did.
Oh, well, this whole thing about machine learning and all of this stuff, I would like anybody that's listening to the show, shoot us an email and let us know if you'd be interested in us maybe doing a series on hacking machine learning and artificial intelligence. And we've had a little bit of experience with that over the past couple of months, and I think it might be an interesting approach. Because a lot of people don't understand that artificial intelligence learns from the tremendous amount of data that comes its way, but we can actually make it do very bad things as well.
Let's see. Do you want to talk about SecureWorks? They made some advancements in their endpoint detection platform. John or Michael, are you familiar with what SecureWorks is doing on the endpoint side?
I haven't paid attention recently. I can tell you again in this release, it is clear that existing protection has fallen short. Okay, stop. Like, I'm done. Like, at that point, stop. And then they named it Next Generation.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's Next Generation. We know what that means? Also doesn't work. So I don't mean to shit on.
But also to throw that out there to Michael and John as well, it's Next Generation antivirus enhanced with threat intelligence.
Oh, my bad. Okay, so it's good then. All right. I should have kept reading.
Are we officially? I think, Paul, you've given me authorization, but I'm now taking my gloves off for threat intelligence. This is a load of crap.
Yes, it is.
And I think I've already talked about it a little bit on some of the previous shows, but whenever I'm reading reports and threat intelligence feeds and they say that this particular group of actors uses ping as one of their tools, you've got to be freaking kidding me.
Well, and so, what really grinds my gears is that they say next generation AV and threat intelligence prevents more threats and provides visibility. Now, when I look at threat intelligence, yeah, it provides more visibility into like what's happening on other people's networks, not necessarily your own, which is way more important.
And we're already finding out with what happened the past couple of weeks with Tanium and some of these other vendors that whenever you install these products, especially a managed security service provider like SecureWorks, you're basically handing over your entire network over to them. And when we pen tested companies like this, a simple breach in one of these organizations can usually lead to a breach of multiple customers. So I'm really, Michael, what's your thought on these managed security service providers? I think it can provide value if you're a small shop and you just can't afford to have a security team. But I very rarely see it ever implemented correctly where it is an effective approach to securing an organization role.
Yeah, I've not looked at it in recent years, but to me, it was always you're a mid-market, maybe now we would say an SMB. It's a good play because you're not going to have the ability to staff something that much and or those types of resources. But I've always looked at this as by the time you're a Fortune 1000 company, you need to spin up your own SOC. You need to spin up your own team. You need to handle it yourself. Somebody could probably, look, I'm always an economics guy. If somebody can show me the case and make the case, I'm down for it, and I'm happy to take a look at it. What I haven't paid attention to in recent years is how much of it is we'll support anything you want under the sun versus this is what we do, this is how it works, this is what you get, this is why it works. And I'm no longer convinced which one I like better.
Mm-hmm. I'm seeing most of our customers coming the opposite direction. They're coming off of doing having an MSSP, realizing it didn't work at all, and then running screaming from it and trying to stand up a SOC as quickly as possible just because it's not effective.
But what size, are those like in the Fortune 1000 or are you finding that's moving into the mid-market?
No. Predominantly mid-market, but we do have some customers that are Fortune 1000 that have basically realized that no small thanks to Security Weekly and what we do in our webcast and stuff. We're like, this is what you need to test your MSSP. If they can't detect this, they're not doing a very good job. And the thing that sucks is if they do the MSSP thing for like a year or two, then they're so far behind the curve in trying to start up their SOC that it becomes really cost prohibitive ever trying to bring things back in.
That's a really interesting point. Especially since you're seeing it in the mid-market. But you're right, because if you think about it, and this, I'll just make it more of a general statement. A lot of people went into, I know what we'll do. I'll sell subscriptions, and they'll be like they never went into it knowing what security is or what they didn't set it up to do that. They set it up to go sell, and
they're very good at that too.
Yeah,
and also this is one of those things that I think looks really good on paper. If I was a CEO, CIO, CFO, the idea of outsourcing all of my security to somebody like a Dell SecureWorks, it just makes sense. But there's an underlying assumption that they're going to care about your network and your data. And there's an underlying assumption that they're actually going to do a competent job of it. And neither of those two things actually are in play for the vast majority of these MSSPs.
There's a couple of announcements from some CASB companies, Cloud Passage being one of them. And John, I know you're familiar with Cloud Passage. They just updated their product, and it includes an addition of the server account monitoring for Windows to help companies achieve compliance. Do you know more of the details there or what they could be referring to?
Well, one of the things that is holding back a lot of vendors like Cloud Passage is they have a tremendous amount of hooks into the operating system, into logs, what's happening on that computer system, firewall rules. But if you're an executive and you say, look, we already have this Cloud Passage product, but we don't actually have account monitoring of what's happening on the user accounts on that system, and we have to go buy another product, well, that's not really a good play, right? Because what you're going to end up having to do is your customers are going to have to buy another product to meet that compliance standard. And then that's just going to give your competitors a wedge to basically come in and start beating you at your own game. So this is basically a play where they're giving people that compliance that is required and it basically locks out a lot of their competitors from trying to eke their way into the space that Cloud Passage is already into right now.
Does it push the needle on security? In other words, if an account is being abused and gets added to domain admins, it's not doing that level of monitoring, correct?
Yeah, it is actually. It's basically getting reports as far as what accounts exist, what privileged accounts are doing, and monitoring those accounts. There is some level of security, but that's only if it can actually be coupled with something like user behavioral analytics.
Okay.
This, as far as the press release, looks like it's a pure play to try to stop the bleeding from anybody or any customers that are leaving strictly because they are looking for a compliant solution that requires account monitoring. And this is giving them that ability to have that. So hopefully this grows into something a little bit better, but right now it's just a compliance play.
Okay.
So is this a leading edge step to try to keep the barriers to entry high, or is this a defensive step? Because
this
without
is a defensive step.
Okay.
Yeah, without question, this is a defensive step.
Skyhigh Networks also had an announcement, and I was actually talking with someone about this whole market and how it diverged from the Firemons and the Two Fins. Skyhigh kind of started out in that realm, and then they're kind of diverging. Skyhigh is now focusing more on the CASB side of things, and Firemon and Two-Fin, I think, are starting to play in that area, but more traditional firewall rule management. They've made a partnership with the Center for Internet Security to provide state, local, and tribal government agencies direct access to vetted cloud security solution via the CIS cyber market. You guys familiar with this?
What is the CIS cyber market? Have you guys ever heard of this before?
Nope, I haven't.
Is that a new TV show? Was that on NBC?
Yes.
Well, the reason why that bothers me is if we're looking at, I don't see CIS cyber. Oh, here we go. So this concerns me because Center for Internet Security was supposed to be neutral, right? They're not supposed to talk about any specific vendors or any of those types of things. And I understand at some point an organization like the Center for Internet Security needs to have a way to make money. And by establishing purchasing programs, we can actually start buying things and basically leveraging multiple small entities to be able to buy products. I think it sounds like a great idea, but I feel somewhat that it's eroding the position that the Center for Internet Security was supposed to do. So I don't think it's probably a smaller thing than what I'm making it out to, but I was there, at the beginning when Alan was having conversations with people and they were starting up the Center for Internet Security, and that's what it was supposed to be. It's supposed to be a trusted advocate that wasn't beholden to any vendors. And I have this intense fear that this is actually going away from that.
Interesting. Also on the CASB front, CipherCloud has been assigned a patent for a system and method to anonymize data transmitted to a destination computing device. And it's interesting, CipherCloud has a very vast offering that protects a lot of different cloud services, and I'm wondering how this patent is going to help their product line.
Let me ask a simpler question. Mm-hmm. Is this an enforceable patent?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Michael.
Because just reading that description,
because
I spend time looking at a lot of these things, so this is where I get more interested. Just to keep in mind, just because you got awarded a patent doesn't mean dick. It just means that you have a patent, good for you, but then you have to be able to defend that patent. So now they have to be able to defend it, and they have to suggest that things like Tor and other stuff don't do the exact same thing or something comparable enough that what they have is actually unique and not really known. Now, what also surprises me is that they filed for the patent on December 14th, 2014, and it was recently awarded. That's not the surprise. But in the last maybe decade or so, the patent office has said, you know what, this whole software thing, we're giving out these patents like candy to stuff we probably shouldn't have. Mm-hmm. We're going to go ahead and slow all that down. So the fact that they didn't slow it down is interesting to me. But just on a plain read of what they've got here, I didn't look at that and go, oh, well, that's really remarkable. But am I missing something, guys?
I don't think so. I think you're spot on. John, I know we've done some patent stuff. Any takes on that? Oh, I thought John was reading. There is a more descriptive thing.
Yeah,
are you there? Sorry, you're back. You there?
Yeah, I am. I was just going to agree with what Michael just said.
Okay.
This is weird for a variety of reasons, but I think that what you read this into is a lot of these companies try to get as many patents as possible because it makes them a lot more attractive whenever they start getting bought.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, I mean, think about it. It's the classic Shark Tank question. Do you have a patent? Oh yeah, I got a patent on that.
Right.
It's have you defended it yet? Are you planning to defend it? Because keep in mind, patents aren't cheap. I mean, depending on how many countries they filed in and what lawyers they worked with, this is anywhere from $10 to $100, $150, $200,000. I mean, so it's not cheap, but anyway.
I don't know. All of our patents we're getting for under 10 grand.
That's good.
You doing a lot of the work yourself?
Yeah, we also got a really good firm as far as the incubator center, a law firm that we go through.
Okay.
But our patents haven't been that complicated, that hard, or that expensive. But if you go with a larger firm, we found in like Washington, D.C., it can get that expensive very, very, very quickly. But no, we've got a great little firm out of Iowa, and it's nowhere near that expensive.
Awesome.
That's awesome. That's really good. You should protect that source then.
I usually don't talk about like vendor reports and studies and stuff, but I thought this one was very relevant. It actually comes from Symantec and in collaboration with their acquisition of Blue Coat. And the interesting thing is, this is their standard like threat report. But they said they stated some statistics on living off the land. And I thought this was very interesting for our enterprise customers. And in all the ones that Blue Coat looked at, 95% of the PowerShell scripts that Blue Coat looked at were malicious, and specifically called out PowerShell as being one of the things, the most popular thing that attackers are using once they gain a foothold on Windows systems. And the remediation, correct, and John, you can probably shed a lot more light on this, it really sucks. Unless you want to disable PowerShell. And that doesn't necessarily help. Well, it's debatable.
Well, you can do a lot with PowerShell. You can set it up so that when it runs, it can only run with signed PowerShell scripts that are signed by a digital certificate from your IT team. I think that would work out really, really, really well. But we haven't seen a really solid PowerShell. None. None.
Because
never.
Because certificates are hard. Setting up a CA for that is hard. It's hard. I mean, we've covered them on our shows over the years. It's hard, and no one does that. Yeah,
and you're starting to see already the pen testing community starting to move away from PowerShell. SubT's work at SubT on Twitter. He's spending a lot of time looking at alternative ways of execution. And .set files are kind of the new hotness. WMI never went away. I think there was even a group, one of the pandas threat groups, they actually were running malware because something in Kaspersky had the ability to execute other programs and scripts. So you're seeing a lot of creativity of executing those scripts out there. Also, PowerShell aside, you don't need to have PowerShell. If PowerShell is restricted, you can actually drop your own version of PowerShell, rename it, put it inside of an executable, and launch it directly from memory. There's a number of other things that you can do.
And there's a JavaScript interpreter style on Windows systems as well. There are like other languages that you can run on Windows.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's tons of different languages and different things that you can hook into. Like I said, the .set scripts, those are from like Com Plus programming from 1999, and those still exist. You can also inject things with various things like Run DLL that never went away. But I do think this is interesting that they're at least calling attention to it, because this is usually where we end up post-exploitation-wise smoking customers with great tools like Bloodhound and PowerShell Empire.
Yep. It ties into some of my other research, John, which we'll get back to probably next week and chat about that. Any other stories of interest here that you guys want to talk about? Oh, Acalvio is building a deception farm to lure attackers.
This is so cool.
Is it cool, or is it just a honeypot?
That was my question. How is this different than a honeypot?
It is a honeypot, but whenever we're talking about there's a honeypot, but then let me give you an example of how this can be really cool. So imagine a bad guy breaks into a computer system, and after a certain clipping threshold, it's discovered that system is compromised. And then you can take that system and put it on another network that looks identical to the network that the attacker was on, but it's filled with fake data, it doesn't have any real systems, and now you can sit and monitor everything that attacker does, and that attacker believes that they have access to not just a system, but a whole network. And I think that is where it is just really, really, really super cool. Unfortunately, there are very few players that are actually at that level of maturity. I see a lot of people that are doing their own scripts and their own ways of actually making that happen with existing security, like honeypot technologies. So if it's just another honeypot, that sucks. But whenever I'm hearing things, and I haven't had a chance to look into this, like deception farms, that sounds badass. That's basically where we can have an entire network where you can capture absolutely everything an attacker is doing. Very similar to Symmetria, Gadi Evron's company. And I think that is neat. But man, Michael, I think that you would agree, there are so many other things that companies should do before they actually start getting to this point. You have to get the fundamentals in place before you start doing these things.
You so read my mind. I was going to go back to two things we always used to look at. Do you actually have time to go watch what an attacker is doing in your network? And if you go to even mature organizations, they go, nope, rip and replace, dump, next. Another question then is, are you good enough to block this stuff? Like, what if that attacker is just jerking you around and you're like, look, we got him contained. Yeah. No. So I always get nervous with stuff like this, but you're right. That's exactly right. I'm reading this release again. This feels a little bit more like architecture than actual changes, but
yeah.
We'll see.
I'm always hopeful. Like I said, there's some very, very large companies that are very well known that have some amazing things, and it's cool, but they're so few and far between. But I think that's where people need to move towards, but get the basics first.
Yeah, and where I think it might have a play, and we got a couple of minutes to chat about this, is when we look at healthcare systems. And I was talking about some of the horrors and listening to Josh Corman talk about some of the horrors that exist in healthcare networks. And as many of us know, there are like, I've got at least 5 fundamental things you should do in your Windows environment to make it more secure and resilient to penetration testers and attackers alike. And when you put that in a healthcare scenario, a lot of those things that you can do to fix Active Directory from a security perspective break legacy operating systems. And in a healthcare environment, getting rid of those legacy operating systems is next to impossible. And so my question for both of you is, are these deception technologies like a good stopgap measure until we can get some of that stuff fixed? Because the FDA would love to say, yeah, you can't have that, but that doesn't really work, right, for a lot of reasons.
I personally think it only works if you're setting up deception technology specifically on your segmented segments, like your healthcare, your MRI systems, your dialysis systems, your SCADA systems, your PCI systems. If you want to use deception technologies for that to try to attract the bad guys to it, I think that may work. But at the same time, you've got to be very careful how you architect it, because it could be very easy for the bad guys to identify it, sniff it as something that's not on the up and up, and then try to find your real network. So I do believe in value in this. Don't get me wrong, Paul, we literally wrote the book on this, but I still come back to again and again, those core fundamentals have got to be in play. And if you can't get them in play on certain segments, isolate those segments, get it in play absolutely every place else, and then start thinking about these types of technologies.
And you have the same message that almost every pen tester I talk to eventually leads into. After we talk about the stuff you should fix in Active Directory, it almost inevitably leads right to, and network segmentation is really important. And how you do that, like the devil's in the details, and that's exactly what you're describing, John.
Yeah,
so you're right in line.
Well, so on that, how often are you going into an organization where you're like, wow, you guys have totally segmented out. Good job. I mean, do you come across that?
We actually have an award. It's called the Honey Badger Award. And whenever we have a customer that has really strong segmentation, really strong security, it's got a little honey badger on the front of it, and it just says, this customer won't give up. I've only handed out 3 or 4 of those in the past 2 years. But that being said, we're seeing a lot more organizations that are starting to implement it, and it takes a while to get it right and get it effective. But this is something we should have been doing 15 years ago, internal segmentation.
Yeah. So are we finding that, is it, from a technology perspective, did it get easier, our ability to segment out? Because, I mean, that whole space 20 years ago was novel. Now it's commoditized. And it's really just down to taking the time to understand what you're expecting your network to do and segmenting it accordingly? Or is there something else that's getting in the way?
It's always been easy, especially at the workstation level, to basically create segmentation that basically says that my system can't talk to Paul's and yours can't talk to mine. That's always been there, and that's always been really easy to do. I just think that people are afraid of it because they're already, if you're an IT group or a security group, you're already used to getting your hand slapped for breaking certain applications, doing a test. And the idea of firewalling every single one of your workstations from each other is horrifying. But the tools have existed for over 10, 15 years, and we have some customers that are really worried about it. But once they implement it, they're like, wow, that was a lot easier than we thought it was going to be. And I think it's more of a will thing. It's just you got to have the will
fear,
to actually take
right?
the
It's not laziness or incompetence, it's fear.
And it's because not a lot of people are doing it. You haven't seen a lot of people burn their hand on that frying pan yet.
Well, and I was talking with Dan King at Source, and he said, even if you do that, you should also go on your switches and prevent ARP cache poisoning, because that would get around the firewall in Windows, right?
Well, there's all kinds of things you can enable from like Cisco root guard, all kinds of different port level security that almost all switches have built into them. Mm-hmm. You just have to turn them on. It's not like, I think like Michael said, it's a commodity now, and many people have already paid for it. They just didn't know it was there.
Yep. All right, with that, we're going to take a very short break, come back, and talk about building a bug bounty program. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.